Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're absolutely dissecting the anatomy of a haunting. We're looking at two genuinely chilling case studies where deeply respected, trusted institutions attempted to cover up their darkest, most unforgivable sins, only to face a supernatural vengeance that simply refused to be silenced. We're going to walk through these events step by step and really analyze how human corruption gave way to undeniable, horrifying manifestations. Okay, let's dive right into this. Imagine standing in a pitch-black, completely sealed room. It's dead silent. Then, your digital recorder picks up this breathless, static-filled whisper, Mujhe yaha band diya gaya. It literally translates to, I am bound here. No way, right? But this isn't from some horror movie. This was an actual EVP, electronic voice phenomena, captured inside a college library that had literally been padlocked shut for over 12 years.
It gives you chills just thinking about it. And that voice brings us to the core question of today's explainer. What exactly happens when sacred, deeply trusted institutions bury their darkest sins? In both of the cases we're analyzing today, we see authority figures, people who are explicitly trusted to care for and educate others, committing totally unspeakable crimes. And why? Basically, just to protect their pristine reputations. But as we're going to see, the truth has this terrifying way of clawing its way right back to the surface.
So here is our roadmap for today. 1. Two tales of terror. 2. The haunted institutions. 3. The dark, hidden secrets. 4. Supernatural manifestations. And 5. Rituals, reckoning, and resolution.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Two Tales of Terror. On one side of the coin, we have the St. Mary's Sacred Heart Church over in Calcutta, which also functioned as a hostel for young women training to become nuns. And on the flip side, we've got a third-floor college library, a classic place of higher learning. The contrast here is just fascinating. Both of these places projected this flawless outward image of piety, respectability, and education, totally squeaky clean. Yet behind those heavy wooden doors, they were hiding profound, incredibly deadly secrets that basically poisoned the very ground they stood on.
Moving right along to Section 2, the haunted institutions.
Okay, before we go any further, we really need to understand the specific supernatural forces at play here, because they are quite different. In South Asian lore, there's the concept of a trapped human spirit, often referred to in these cases as a bhoot or chudail. This is usually a spirit bound to a specific location by a sudden, unjust death, and they're basically just seeking some kind of resolution. Now, that is entirely different from demonic possession. Possession involves an invasive, malevolent entity, or sometimes a whole collection of them, seeking absolute, chaotic revenge. It's totally destructive. And as you'll see, the exact nature of the haunting directly correlates to the nature of the tragedy.
Which brings us to Section 3, the dark, hidden secrets.
The source material for both these locations reveals two incredibly grim realities. In our college library case, a 20-year-old librarian was actually murdered by a college professor. Because he was in a position of power, the crime was entirely covered up. They falsely ruled it as suicide, which effectively trapped her spirit in this endless loop of injustice. But honestly, the church case, it's even more harrowing. A young woman named Maria was coerced into a relationship by Father Neil. When she gave birth, Father Neil and the head of the center, Mother Agnes, just straight up lied to Maria. They told her the baby had died. But the terrifying reality? To protect the church's reputation, they actually buried the newborn alive in the cemetery.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how those specific crimes manifested supernaturally. The sheer horror of the betrayal of Maria and her child basically sent out an invitation for a multi-entity demonic possession. We're talking severe physical distortions here, blackened eyes, joints bending backward, the whole shebang. On the other hand, the librarian's covered-up murder resulted in classic highly localized poltergeist activity, EMF spikes, falling books, and this really desperate desire to communicate through modern technology. Basically, the trauma dictated the terror.
Let's look closer at that in Section 4, supernatural manifestations.
Over in the college library, a paranormal investigator named Dr. Siddharth Mehta led this clandestine 3-day tech investigation with a group of brave students. The escalation they documented was textbook, but man, was it terrifying. Day 1, they're seeing sudden EMF spikes and flashlights just mysteriously dying out of nowhere. By day 2, physical objects, like heavy books, started hurling off the shelves. And then day 3, full poltergeist activity completely took over. Furniture was violently overturned, and these massive, bone-chilling temperature drops eventually forced the entire team to just abandon the room and flee. Meanwhile, back at the convent, the manifestations were violently, disturbingly physical. Maria was found in her room and her limbs were twisted unnaturally, literally resembling a discarded rubber doll. Her eye sockets appeared as these deep, blackened pits, and she started speaking in multiple, overlapping voices at the exact same time. The violence totally peaked when she leapt up like a wild animal and brutally bit Mother Agnes, actually tearing the flesh right from her hand. It was abundantly clear at this point this wasn't just a haunting, this was a full-scale spiritual invasion.
Actually, I want to pause on this number right here. 20%. During that library investigation I mentioned, a student named Rohan pulled out his smartphone. It had a solid 20% battery left, and in mere seconds, right in front of his eyes, he watched it drain completely to zero. Now, in paranormal investigations, this massive, instantaneous drain of lithium-ion batteries is a huge red flag. It is the absolute classic sign of an entity actively pulling energy from its surrounding environment, so it can manifest.
So, how do you stop it? Section 5, Rituals, Reckoning, and Resolution.
At the church, Father Edmund attempted to perform a formal exorcism late on a Friday night, strictly following the book. Step 1. Maria was bound to a chair just for everyone's safety. Step 2. She was completely surrounded by crucifixes and lit candles to create a strict spiritual boundary. Step 3. Holy water was continuously sprinkled over her, which, terrifyingly, visibly burned her skin. And Step 4. Father Edmund loudly recited specific prayers and mantras to command the entities to leave. It was an incredibly chaotic, forceful, spiritual battle.
Now contrast that with the completely different approach taken in the library. A traditional practitioner, Babasati Dev, wasn't trying to expel a demon. His whole goal was to pacify a wronged human spirit. So he draws a protective salt line, starts chanting ancient Sanskrit mantras, and right there in the middle of the library at 2:30 in the morning, he builds a sacred fire, a Havan Kund. By offering new clothes and water, he essentially performed the final death rites that the murdered librarian was denied 20 years ago. He finally gave her peace.
But back at the church, yeah, peace was absolutely not an option. The entities inside Maria demanded a bloody reckoning. During the intense climax of the exorcism, the very floorboards of the room literally began to crack open. The protective candles totally blew out, only to reignite moments later with this unnatural flame. And then, in a horrific display of supernatural justice, the corrupt Father Neil and Mother Agnes were physically lifted into the air by an unseen force. The flames leaped onto their clothes, and both of them were burned alive in midair. They were entirely beyond the help of Father Edmund.
So the crucial point is captured in these final, bone-chilling words spoken through Maria right as those authorities were incinerated. Ek bap, ek hi saza, which translates to one father, one punishment. It was the ultimate, horrific confirmation. The spirits enacting this vengeance actually included the very child that Neil and Agnes had callously buried alive just to protect their precious institutional standing. When we look at the final outcomes of these cover-ups, it leaves a pretty grim toll. As we saw, two authority figures, Agnes and Neil, paid with their lives in the most brutal way imaginable. The fate of the murderous college professor, that actually remains ominously unknown in the records. He just vanished. And Father Edmund survived the exorcism but was left deeply, permanently traumatized by what he witnessed. Because of all this, the Sacred Heart Church and its hostel were shuttered and abandoned forever. The institution was entirely destroyed by its own hidden sins.
Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. You know, we look at these events and we instantly label them hauntings, right? We fear the ghosts, the possessions, the things that go bump in the night. But when the dust finally settles and the rituals end, you really have to ask yourself, are the spirits the true monsters of these stories? Or is the true horror the corrupt institutions that created them in the first place? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I highly encourage you to reflect on these case files, and I'll see you next time.